Hey, what's up, guys? As we had recently, I guess you can say, announced our AMV contest, I figured it'd be good to give a tutorial for not only those who wanted to participate but may not have made an AMV or have a lot of knowledge on how to make an AMV, but also for those who did not initially show interest but would like to know how to make an AMV and eventually hopefully become part of the contest, because we would like to include as many people in club as possible. So here we go. We're going to get started with our How Can AMV basics. To start off, one of the first things that you're going to need to get, obviously, is all the footage from anime. Problem is, I cannot let you know in this video how to go about getting the AMV or the anime. But for how to get it, you can always ask on Facebook, or you can ask us in person if we are around. So one of the first things that you're going to need to do after you get your anime is to put it in an organization. Now, this is what would sound, or what would probably seem like a no-brainer. You could get caught up with the amount of anime that you grab or the amount of footage that you grab, and you're going to need a place to store all of it, because eventually it may just kind of look more like this, which is kind of a problem. So the reality is, what's better is to make sure you get it all in folders, especially more specifically a songs folder here. You want to have, now mine's a little convoluted, I need to go clean it out, but you need to definitely have a songs folder, because you're going to eventually get, if you plan on doing this more than once, you're going to start having a lot of songs that you think are going to be really good for AMVs, and then just kind of be without it, or without any kind of organization. You're just going to have to find it eventually. The next thing that you're really going to need to look into is what kind of editing program you're going to have. Now, unless you're on campus and have the Adobe products available to you, or you already own either Adobe or Final Cut, you lucky dog, then you probably only have Movie Maker available to you, unless you're a Mac user and have, again, either an Adobe or Final Cut available to you. But for regular PC owners who don't have any editing program, you probably have Movie Maker if your PC was made past 2011. And this version of Movie Maker isn't really bad. Now, you can't use the older XP version of Movie Maker, while there are a lot of people that kind of prefer it based on the way the timeline works. It's not really compatible with a lot of anime footage, because a lot of the footage comes in MP4. Or you'll make it an MP4, because the reason being is that it's a higher def resolution or a type of file, and it'll make your AMVs look better. So the other problem with that occurs with Movie Maker is that any file, now it's not just because of 2, but any file that you have to prepare them. Usually it'll automatically do it. It just didn't. It had it stopped because of a test I was doing later. But yeah, I mean, it has to prepare each of the files, and then not only that, but everything is kept on a continuous timeline. So as you're kind of editing out stuff that we'll get to slightly more specifically later, it starts to get a little more convoluted, because all of this is on one timeline, and there's no space in between different video files that you grab. They're right next to each other, and they don't deviate from that. So it can be a little hard to distinctify where your actual AMV starts and where it ends, and where your excess footage begins. Adding any music all it does is it sits there at the beginning, and if you need to edit the music at all, it can get a little more complicated. But we'll go over more on how to get through Movie Maker, because it's not bad. It isn't the worst, though, because it's a very good program. It's actually better, I think, than the XP version for making an AMV, because there's a lot of good ways, though, that this can be utilized. It's just the main downfall is that you don't get a lot of the complicated effects. But if you're just making an AMV, this is a nice way that you don't have to spend any money on an expensive editor, and you get to just make an AMV that looks really cool. So the next program then that we're going to type of program that you can use if it's available to you, or you plan on making a lot of videos in the future, in which maybe it's not a bad idea for you to get one, which is an advanced editing program. This one, for example, is Power Director 12. They did recently come out with Power Director 13, but I didn't plan on upgrading because this does everything I need it to do. Now, I do a lot of editing in and of itself, so we're going to go over here to a different file because I totally didn't do that. This is completely planned and everything. So yeah, what we're kind of looking at here in this situation is, you get an advanced editing program. You would get it if you only really needed it, but this isn't something that you have to have a good AMV. But I opted to get this program because I edit a lot of videos and I plan on using more complicated measures to make sure I do that. So I had a case where I wanted to get it, and then I also used it for AMVs as well. And it's very good to have a program like this for kind of a reference on how Power Director is. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's about the same level as Sony Vegas. In my opinion, though, I prefer this one to Sony Vegas because of a few other things that we can get into in the advanced editing tutorial that will come out within the coming week. So one of the best things about a program like an advanced editing program is that you get to control where your video goes. So you don't have to worry about that, lack of spacing. In fact, you get to create as much spacing as you want. So, you can put a file here, and then you get to also have this multi-tiered, you get to have this layered video system. But you can split a file, which you can look at again. We can look at a little bit more, but any basic tutorial of any editor will show you how to split a file. Movie Maker actually makes it very obvious for you. You just go to edit and it has split there. So generally, it's very easy to figure out which one is what. But you can space them then at any point that you wish, and you can create, you can have a black screen if you need one. Otherwise, then, you can just space it out and then eventually put stuff in later. So we'll go back to that first file we were in to give you a good example of things. All right, so now let's get into the bread and butter of this whole thing, actually making the AMV. Now, I should at least be able to tell you in the basics on how to set up the construction of an AMV. You'd think, right? So let's get on to doing that. So one of the first things that you're really going to need to do is you'll have to get episodes or just like different episode tracks and things like that, or files, and you'll have to do one of two things. Now you can cut them down. So this is one large file of 45 minutes of footage. That is it's essentially a compilation. So this one's a little easier to work with than just a regular full episode. But I still opted to, at the beginning, which is what you can do with an episode in general, which is to take the shots or separate different shots based on what they contain, to kind of just make it so that it's like, okay, this has a scene that I like. I can take it, move it over, and then move it over to the beginning, which is where I place the actual contents of my AMV. You always want to put that towards the front because that just makes it, clearly that makes it easier to sync up, especially with music, which generally you'll keep down here. Or you'll have somewhere, where with Movie Maker, that's all your choices. You can't move the position of your music anyway. But more on that in another tutorial. So yeah, within this though, if you use this kind of editing, you get the shot that you want and you can just take it over. So it's relatively easy, but it's just a time-consuming amount of work for, to before you even begin making the AMV, which is just kind of in general, you're going to have to do some work before you act as preparation before actually making the AMV itself. The other way that you can do it, though, to at least lessen the amount of pre-work you have to do, is just leave the episode file as it is, or just this, the main large file that you have, and start it and just take what you want as you go. So it's just like, well, I want, so you just say like, I want from the start of this scene to that point, and this is what I know I want exactly, and then I can take it over, and then I don't have to do as much extra work while actually looking at it in I don't have to do as much extra work when it's actually over there with the music to do any kind of sync I want, things like that. So that's about it for the basics. You just really what you're going to be doing is just going to be taking scenes from an anime you like and putting it with the music. Now, some of the good advice I can give you in terms of that in general is, you should have the anime, the AMV, the visual part match up with the audio. This is something that I've seen very poorly done before, where it's like a very fast paced song with a very slow moving visuals. Having the visual and the audio mix well together is really one of the things that it can make or break your AMV. So you want to make sure that everything works well together. You want to have a concisive idea of what you are doing for the AMV. And in terms of kind of coming up with the idea for an AMV, you just have to let it come to you. Essentially, it's like creating anything, like creating a story. You have to let that come to you. It's not really something that anyone can just give to you. So that's about it for the basics of making an AMV. Just be prepared to see an extra tutorial on kind of getting around Movie Maker itself, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that would like to utilize that if they can, because it's a free program and you don't have to spend anything for it. And then I'll give a more advanced tutorial on advanced editing programs with making AMVs, kind of all the things you can do with those. And then finally, just in general, some of the best way to make an AMV look the best it can. Making an AMV is something that can be really fun and definitely something that you should consider doing, because it's really cool to make a good video out of something that you really like. So we'll see you again at the next tutorial episode, and I'll probably see you next semester, because by the time this comes out, the anime club is already over. So see you later.